What is power scaling? Something that surprisingly was debated about during the past several years. Although there are a few channels that actually made pretty good videos explaining that very concept and still hold up pretty well. But there are also some channels that didn't know what they were talking about at all. So what am I doing here? Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Power Scaling 101. I'm your host Surfbone, and in this series, I hope to educate audiences, especially normies, on the various terms, arguments, and myths related to the subject of scaling fictional characters and what they're truly capable of. And what better topic to begin this series than with a video concerning the term itself, power scaling. As I referenced earlier, these YouTubers had made many videos addressing the misinterpretations of the term power scaling, and educating their audiences on what the term actually stands for, in which I think they all explain the concept very well, and most of their explanations about the topic definitely hold up today. However, I believe that a much more up-to-date, in-depth, and educational video going over the concept as a whole is very much necessary, and the many things pertaining to power scaling need to be addressed and properly explained to avoid any further misinterpretations going forward, especially if I plan on going forward with a series called Power Scaling 101. So without further ado, let's get into it. So what is power scaling? Well, if we want to take the simplest route to explaining it, let's take the term power scaling itself and split up the two words that coexist within the term and define them separately. The scaling portion of the term would be referring to this definition of scale, where it is defined as the relative size or extent of something. And the power portion of the term would be referring to this definition of power, where it is defined as physical strength and force exerted by something or someone. So if we take these two portions and add them together, we would get a combined definition that would be somewhere on the lines of a method of determining the relative size or extent of something or someone's physical strength and force that they can exert. So that seems like a pretty fair definition, right? Well, unfortunately, although easy to understand going off of the two words that coexist within the term itself, it's not technical enough to be considered an accurate definition at all. After all, power scaling doesn't always refer to determining the strength of a character. It is used to determine the speed of the character, the potency of their abilities, etc., which I will cover in other videos, of course. So what would be considered a more technical or more accurate definition of the term power scaling? Well, this is what I came up with. Generally, power scaling should be defined as the method of determining the capabilities and/or limits of a character by means of quantifying feats that they have demonstrated and interpreting statements about and/or that concern the character in question that would help better establish the character's capabilities and/or limits. In case that's a bit too wordy for you, a much more simpler definition would be the method in which we quantify a character's capabilities through real-life measurements and concepts. So most of you have probably gotten the gist of it by now, but some of you may be unaware of the word quantify. Quantify being defined as to express or measure the quantity of. To help better explain what it means to quantify something, let's look at a debate between Seth the programmer and a normie infamously named Vegito. For context, Seth is defending the position that Broly from Dragon Ball Z is stronger than anyone from either the Dragon Ball Z anime or the movies, not including these two, of course. And Vegito brings up a villain from the movie Fusion Reborn named Janemba, who he believes to be stronger.
Bro, what are you talking about, bro? Go cheat to be the reality warper. What are you talking about?
Quantify reality warping.
First off, Janemba changed the very nature of hell and heaven.
What does that mean?
I mean, it's kind of common sense, bro. I'm just
How
saying
is it common sense? Explain it if it's common sense.
He changed the very nature of heaven and hell. He brought the dead.
What
back
does that
to life.
mean? What does that mean? Quantify it.
What? You want me to quantify reality
Quantify
warping?
how much power you need to do that, yes.
I mean, there's different levels of reality warping.
Okay, quantify this level of reality warping.
I got too many levels for me to... Hello.
I'm only asking for one level. This one.
Ooh, look. Alright.
Can you quantify it or not?
Like I said before, there's different types. There's mad
I'm
types of creation.
only asking for this reality warping. Janemba's reality warping. Quantify it.
spatial manipulation.
That is not quantifying. Quantify how much power and energy it would take to do that.
I'm not to tell you this, but reality warping doesn't require a power level.
Then why are you using it in a debate?
What do you mean debate? It's a power, isn't it?
What? No, I'm saying prove that has any validity in a debate against Broly.
So you saying destruction can be reality warping? We can change the very nature of the universe itself.
Yes.
So to summarize this clip, Vegito is arguing that Janemba could beat Broly mainly because he is a
reality warper.
In which Seth retorts with
Quantify reality warping.
Vegito then brings up Janemba's feats of
He changed the very nature of heaven and hell.
and
He bring the dead.
What
back
does that
to life.
mean?
Sen then asks him
What does that mean?
what Vegito is struggling to prove here is that he's bringing up feats that Janemba has done that can supposedly help him defeat Broly, but is unable to answer,
Quantify how much power and energy it would take to do that.
which is basically one of the main fundamentals of how to power scale. If Janemba can change the very nature of hell and heaven, it's our job to use real-life measurements and concepts to determine how powerful you would need to be in order to do that. So now hopefully we now understand what power scaling is. But you may be wondering why I'm not using this definition that most Versus wikis use for their definition of power scaling. Well, if you read the entire page concerning the definition, you would know that particular definition is in reference to one of the two forms of power scaling, better known as inverse scaling. Inverse scaling, as I define it, refers to the method of determining a character's or characters' standing within their own verse/series by means of comparing their own feats and statements concerning their abilities and or limits to other characters. While the other form of power scaling, known as cross-verse scaling, again as I define it, refers to the method of determining the capabilities and or limits of a character when put in a neutral setting against the rest of fiction. So now that we got more concrete definitions, let's get into what most people don't often bring up or even properly explain. What mainly makes these two separate forms of scaling different? Let's first talk about inverse scaling. Now, what methods are natively used in inverse scaling that aren't natively used in cross-verse scaling? For sake of brevity, I'll use this clip from one of Seth's old videos where he basically covers the essence of inverse scaling.
The essence of power scaling is to extrapolate the scale within a series to answer the powers of featless characters that fight other characters that do have feats. It is not what determines how a character reached a certain level of power. Say for example, Jiren beats Golden Frieza, and Golden Frieza beats Gohan. Power scaling would be to dictate that because Jiren beat someone who beat Gohan, Jiren can himself beat Gohan. That's what power scaling is.
As said within the video, inverse scaling tackles the scaling of a character within their own series, and methods like A is greater than B and B is greater than C can help better establish where a character stands in comparison to others native to the verse. But what about cross-verse scaling? What are its main defining traits? Well, it most often indicates taking two characters from two different series and putting them up against each other, hence the term cross-verse. For example, let's grab Goku from Dragon Ball and Superman from DC Comics and throw them into a space that isn't located in either verse. So that means neither have the home field advantage or outside help that can only be found in their own universes, which means it's just them and their standard equipment. Now you may be asking, don't you have to use inverse scaling in cross-verse scaling? Well, yeah, you'd have to in order to actually be able to scale the character. But unlike inverse scaling, you can't use the A is greater than B and B is greater than C argument in cross-verse scaling. If you did, it'd essentially sound like this. Well, since Jiren can body Goku, I think Jiren should be able to beat Superman. Like what? Where's the logic and reasoning in that argument? How'd you get from Jiren beating Goku and then saying he can now for some reason beat Superman because of it? These types of arguments are commonly known as headcanon, which I will be covering in a future video. But besides that, since we're now completely educated on what power scaling is, let's get into the basics and what you need to know about properly power scaling a series or character. So how do you power scale a fictional character? Well, we must start off by listing off the two different types of evidence that are required when power scaling a particular character. These two things being the feats demonstrated by the character and the statements made about the character. A feat being defined as an achievement that requires great courage, skill, or strength, and a statement being defined as a definite or clear expression of something in speech or writing. So on the surface, both sound like pretty simple concepts to understand, right? Most of you probably believe that this is all you need. Well, it's time to get way more technical. Let's start off with feats. Like we already acknowledged, feats are essentially achievements made by someone that are worthy of acknowledgement, and feats can be categorized into almost anything, such as feats of strength, feats of agility, feats of intelligence, and the list goes on. I do plan on covering the complexities of each category of feats in their own separate videos, so let's move on. Feats actually have two different classifications, these being direct feats and indirect feats. Direct feats being the demonstration of a particular feat that has been performed by the character itself. For example, a character obliterating a planet would be classified as a direct feat because it's something that they have demonstrated themselves to be capable of doing. A character moving faster than their opponent is also a direct feat, because again, they themselves are demonstrating the ability to move faster than their opponent. So what about indirect feats? Well, indirect feats relate to what a character should be capable of that often falls back on a direct feat that they have demonstrated themselves. And what you'll also start to notice is that indirect feats are very much involved with how inverse scaling works. For example, Goku at the start of the Android arc was shown in Super Saiyan to be capable of tanking several sword slashes from future Trunks with only his finger, which is a direct feat. But when it comes to feats that involve fighting an opposing character, we have to ask ourselves, what makes fighting them actually impressive? Well, let's look back at what feats future Trunks has demonstrated so far. He was shown to be able to cut Mecha Frieza in half with a single slice and then sliced him up again into several pieces. Frieza himself has shown at bare minimum in a near-death state to survive a planet exploding on top of him without any further injuries. So because Goku during this time, as a Super Saiyan, scales above the attacks from future Trunks that recently cut Frieza into mincemeat, and Frieza can still tank planets exploding when in a near-death state, which indicates that this Super Saiyan Goku has indirect feats of him scaling above planetary very easily. So while direct feats are fairly easy to spot, and making sound arguments using them for a character are fairly simple to make. However, the strongest arguments for scaling a character at a certain level often involve the usage of indirect feats, which although strong, tends to fly over the heads of many normies that float around the Versus community. For now, let's talk about statements, something a lot of people still seem to misunderstand. First, we must address what statements are in power scaling, how to judge the validity of a statement, and how they can be used as evidence. To properly explain what statements are, we must first ask ourselves, what's the main difference between feats and statements in power scaling? Well, in very easy and simple terms, feats are what's being shown, while statements are what's being told. This explanation works because it helps explain how you can take statements from books of literature and categorize them as feats, because although it may not be visually showing us what's going on, feats relate to the events that are taking place within the story being told. They aren't just about the big old pretty pictures. So what can statements provide that relates to power scaling? Well, there's at least one major thing that statements can provide in power scaling: context. Context being defined as the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. An easy example of this is when the story gives you a quick portfolio about the character, or in comics where they monologue about the many great things that the characters accomplished throughout their life. To demonstrate the importance of context, let's pretend you've never seen this Batman scan before. Can you interpret what Batman is doing throughout all these scans without having the statements to better interpret what's going on? Not really. Without the context or statements, we couldn't really tell what he's doing in these scans that are worth praising. There's even this meme in power scaling that references the many times where in the story it seems like the character is performing all these good feats, but then it's later stated that it's all just a dream, and then it never happened, they just dreamt this up. But when it comes to using statements as evidence, we must first ask ourselves many important questions, such as, who is making the statement? Who or what is the statement referring to? What information is being provided by the statement? and probably the most important one, does the statement introduce a contradiction? Now, what these first three questions do is help better establish a significance into what's being said, while the fourth one relates back to the validity of the statement, and whether or not the statement being true would actually go against the story being told. So the answers to the second or third question ultimately don't really matter if you answer yes to the fourth question, which would then bring us back to the first question. Was this statement made by someone from within the story, such as a character or a narrator, or someone outside the story, such as an author, guidebook, director, etc.? If the statement was made by a character within the story, then the contradicting statement can be most often get easily explained via the context of the narrative. But if it was made by someone outside the story, then it can easily be dismissed, as the statement contradicts what occurs within the main source material and doesn't hold any value. I will cover the outside story statements in other videos, so save your salt and our questions for that. And this video is getting long enough, so let's get to the last section of this video, the misconceptions about power scaling itself. Doesn't the series have bad power scaling if the power-ups or power progression don't make sense? Absolutely not. I believe Seth actually explained this best during the time when people were getting pissed off about how powerful Kefla was when she was first introduced into Dragon Ball Super. Because in response to this, people immediately went to blame power scaling for this occurring. Which, if you knew anything about power scaling, you know this has nothing to do with this. Then, what is it? It's writing. It's a job for any author or writer of a series to not only make a story that is easy to follow, but also easy to understand. Because if you don't implement that into your writing, your audience will begin to become confused and less interested. Because whether or not your story is set in real life or a cartoon, it has some level of believability. In writing, believability is defined as the quality of being convinced or realistic. And as shown in anime, for example, you have much more freedom to make unrealistic things happen in your show than, say, a show set in real life. But now your job is to make what happens within your show seem convincing. Like, oh, I get it. I can see that happening, that makes sense. Since it can't necessarily be realistic or you'd be taking away what makes a cartoon enjoyable. For example, My Hero Academia, the first thing that was established within this series is that the vast majority of the world's population have superpowers called quirks, which can range from something completely useless to downright overpowered. And although where quirks come from is stated to be unknown, it is at least acknowledged by the series. So what My Hero has done is set a very high bar in terms of what the audience should expect to be considered believable in a world like My Hero. It would probably take something like the author introducing a Saitama-like character that just souls the entire cast and just leaves without any explanation as to what just happened, or a ship between Deku and Eri. Basically, it would take something so ludicrous and bad for My Hero's audience to truly start scratching their heads in confusion as to what they just saw and possibly just give up on the series. But to be honest, knowing the current My Hero fandom, the only thing they really get pissed off about is when the show doesn't look 100% like the manga, even though their show was literally meant to be the best animated shonen of all time. And they've already made fan art of the ship I mentioned earlier, but that's obviously not the point I'm trying to make, and I'm getting a bit off topic. The point is, just because a show like Dragon Ball Super doesn't make sense of why certain characters are this powerful, has nothing to do with quote-unquote bad power scaling. And actually pisses me off when people keep using the phrase bad power scaling as an alternative for bad writing, when in truth, we often use power scaling to help better identify these instances of bad writing. Let me explain. Imagine if we have a house that was just recently built, but it also happens to look kind of off on a surface level. So a man comes up with a ruler and takes measurements of the house. And with that ruler, he starts to notice the flaws in the architecture of the house. Let's say he was able to tell that one side of the house is taller than the other. Then imagine the family that just bought the house starts ridiculing the ruler for the flaws that it just proved exists. Do you see the parallel? The reason why the ruler shouldn't be ridiculed for why the house was poorly built is the same reason why power scaling shouldn't be ridiculed for why a show is poorly written. It's the architect that didn't notice the flaws when building the house, and the author that didn't notice the flaws when writing the story who are at fault. And at the end of the day, power scaling is the ruler that we use to help measure how powerful characters are in fiction. Luckily, we are in a time where power scaling is far more accepted into the community than it has 2 or 3 years ago, and those people who still preach that power scaling is dumb are incredibly few in number. However, I still felt like it was important to address, especially in a video like this. Well anyway, that's all I'll be teaching for this episode. I have many other video topics planned for this series, because there's so much more about that I simply can't just put into one video. But obviously knowing what you guys want to see as soon as possible is very important, so please comment down below on what topics you want to see me cover next. And don't forget to like and share this video, and also subscribe to my channel, because doing all these things will help let me know that this is the content you want to see, and it'll help especially better motivate me to get these videos done even faster, especially since a lot of work goes into making these videos. And do expect me to release videos going over attack potency and destructive capacity, as well as a video going in depth about all the speed tiers used within power scaling within the coming weeks. But other than that, thank you all for watching, and class is dismissed.